I probably made money regardless, just having spent those dollars in the meantime as opposed to putting them aside or whatever, because the dollar is down 50% against Bitcoin in the last 12 months, is what you told me.
Correct. Actually, it's more than that. I haven't done the actual calculation to see how degraded the value is. But if you think about it, what was Bitcoin at the beginning of this year? 1,000, and here we are at 3. So we've had that increase, 2/3 gain, and so that's basically an accurate measure of the amount of purchasing power that the dollar has lost. And you can do that metric really easily because the greater percentage is the actual loss of purchasing power from the dollar, not nominal, not notional, but what you could actually buy with it.
Yeah, anyone that's owned Bitcoin over the past year has seen their purchasing power rise. That is absolutely for certain. And now Bitcoin is almost daily front page news. Certainly at Zero Hedge today, we see Bitcoin spikes to new record high over 3,500. So I logged into.
Seriously?
Yeah, I logged into Coinbase. We're at 3,548 as we speak.
I hadn't gotten even into that far. I'm running slow. We were out of the county yesterday, and so everything's like lagging.
Yeah.
So I hadn't gotten to that stage yet, but I knew it wasn't going to be down. The thing about the cryptos is that quite seriously, and this is something that you will have to wait a little bit in order to see it happen before you believe me, but we have not even had 1% of the population of the U.S. become involved yet. And I think we're going to cross the 1, 2, and 3% threshold in a matter of months, starting in February of 2018. So if you think it's hitting the mainstream now, you haven't seen anything.
Now let's just talk about that a little bit. I think that February of 2018 deadline is right around the time you're expecting to see a $13,800 Bitcoin price, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's been holding steady in the data. You have to understand we don't get numbers showing up every day. People think I can reach in and give them a number for a coin, and it does not work that way. But when we do get a number, the supporting sets, it's like a descriptor set, and it's the label for that descriptor set. So as the supporting sets keep piling in underneath that. And so its pyramid of support is broadening. So, and this has been going on for, I don't know how long, maybe 12 months, 14 months, something like that we've had these descriptor sets building and support under that. So I don't see any reason to think that we won't reach that. In between now and then, we're going to have a big quick rise up to like 6,800, and then a sort of a crashy couple of days. Might lose 30% once we hit this like I think it's like 6,888. Why Bitcoin is all triggered, or I don't want to use that word, but why it pivots around 888 number, the 8 number, I'm unable to say, but it does consistently seem to demonstrate that. And so I think we'll drop down maybe as much as 38 to 40%, and then back up in a few days, and then off we go into February. And as near as we can tell in our data sets from this point, that'll be our last major pullback.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin Cash. When I mentioned Bitcoin at 35.48 today, that's to say nothing of your free Bitcoin Cash coins, guys, that you got if you held Bitcoin right through the fork there. And I'm not sure what Bitcoin Cash is at today. Let's say it's at 275. That's just free money, and I'm personally going to let mine ride. I've told this to my friends, just talked about it in a conversation with Joe and Brad Peters, the Intel software engineer, in a conversation we had last night about that Lynette Zhang thing and the blockchain and the evildoers, so we can talk about that if you like. But yeah. I told them I'm going to let it ride. I don't know what it's going to do. It could go to 10, it could go to 10,000. I don't care. I'm going to let it ride. It was free, so why not?
Right. Well, here's something about the Bitcoin Cash fork as well. I don't know that the thrashing around at the moment relative to price is any kind of an indicator for what will be happening with it later. So the political machinations aside on its creation, nonetheless, the Bitcoin Cash now is an experimental test bed. Because there's less value that's locked up in it the way we have with Bitcoin, we're going to have a freer attitude about implementing changes within the Bitcoin Cash protocol. And so I think, to a certain extent, that may be a parallel, if you will, operational development test bed. You shouldn't ever use any of those words together. But it may end up being that, such that if they do have major improvements that they can demonstrate, speed, etc., then those could be because it's the same code base, quickly adopted into Bitcoin once it's been proven that the net negative effect is essentially zero.
Okay, so they've got a nice little test lab they can use.
Yeah, and without much money invested in it. See, I mean, we don't have a huge amount of the market cap of cryptos locked up in it to where we're afraid to monkey with it. And that's a lot of it now. And I get that, as somebody who holds Bitcoin and holding it through the fork, I appreciate that we don't have to be concerned about a radical element within the Bitcoin community saying, let's do this, major choppy stuff on the code without understanding what we're getting into. And so I like the idea that, if we do have a good idea, let's let Bitcoin Cash do it and see what happens. Let's let Mikey do it, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Bitcoin Cash as it relates to Wall Street. Right now, the only way people could even get Bitcoin, if you're not going to buy it directly, since there's no ETFs, the Winklevoss ETF was not approved, is to get that over-the-counter vehicle called GBTC. Are you familiar with that one? Because I want to read something to you.
No, I'm not. I haven't run across that yet.
Okay. Well, it's just run gangbusters along with the price of Bitcoin. I believe about a year and a half ago, when Bitcoin had corrected back down to 400 or 500, right in there, you could get in on one share of GPTC for under 100. I think at $60 at one point. Today it hit 600. So that is one vehicle to own Bitcoin through, although you obviously don't hold the private keys. And I was looking at some news today. I wanted to see how they were going to handle the Bitcoin fork. And without boring you to tears with all of this stuff, they essentially are saying that the sponsor currently expects to cause the trust to liquidate any Bitcoin Cash associated with the Bitcoin held by the trust, and to cause the proceeds of such liquidation to be distributed on a pro rata basis to holders of units of the trust. It is expected that any such distribution would be made only after allowing time for evaluation of the market for Bitcoin Cash in consideration of the manner in which to liquidate such Bitcoin Cash, which may be months after the fork occurs. So they're basically saying we may or may not. If you continue
right,
reading,
yeah, we're not sure.
It says, but we what does it say here? It says the amount of any distribution will be net expenses of the sponsor and the trust, including costs associated with liquidation and distribution. And basically, they go on to say, and we may never distribute it. So I thought that was interesting. It's a little bit like Coinbase, which got themselves in quite of a rip roar over this whole thing, with lawsuits being threatened if they don't give their Bitcoin Cash to the people who did hold their Bitcoin through the fork on Coinbase. So I wonder how that'll shake out.
You understand about the exchanges, of course, and the double bind that this put them into. Okay, and I'll tell you a weird rumor. All right, I heard a weird rumor that there was going to be an attempted takeover of an exchange because people that were involved with the Bitcoin Cash could foresee the situation, or they engineered it. And the rumor is indeterminate. There's no real ability for me to validate it, but it sort of made sense, because the problem is the exchanges. Say that Coinbase, let's just choose Mythical Exchange, okay? So Mythical Exchange has got 40,000 new people signing up every week even, or month. All right, well, we can expect that those 40,000 people, they'll probably try and instantly on exchange, Mythical Exchange here, they'll try and buy something. The odds are that because they're noobs, they're going to try and buy a Bitcoin or an Ethereum because they're scared of everything else. We're just speculating here. But the net result is that out of this is that Mythical Exchange should be able to make a projection and say, well, look, we're going to need to be able to service and supply these 40,000 people, and we'll just concentrate on Bitcoin, and say that among the 40,000 people coming in, they each got a quarter. Okay, so they got to buy 10,000 Bitcoins a month to supply this demand. And the fact of the matter is, these exchanges, their profit margins, if you will, are met by maintaining a pool. So when you buy Bitcoin on the exchange, they say, okay, we sold it to you. And it's not actually until you take the Bitcoin and take it and put it in your own personal wallet on your PC that an actual Bitcoin transaction happens. Because the exchange has got an algorithm that says, look, 9% of these people are never going to move it. Another 11% might move it. So we've got 20% to play with. So we don't even have to buy 100% of the Bitcoin. We only need to have 80%. And then we can use the rest of the money that's being spent on the Bitcoin as our float to cover our operational expenses. Sort of makes sense?
Yeah, it's a little bit it's fractional reserve Bitcoin.
Yeah, it is. Fundamentally, it's fractional reserve all coins. Okay, it's fundamental fractional reserve all coins. Unless they're going to charge you a straight up fee of X amount for doing the conversion and make the calculations on how much it actually costs them in terms of time, energy, and everything. Bear in mind, when you buy on Mythical Exchange, you get your Bitcoin nearly instantly, but the actual settlement on the Bitcoin network might take 3 hours if they actually purchased one for you. And so they're sort of floating it to you anyway. Under the circumstances, they got caught in a real bind. Because say that we're just talking with 40,000 people and they only had enough actual Bitcoins purchased, they only had 80%. Well, they're only going to get 80% of the expected amount of Bitcoin Cash. So they had to do one of two things. They had to get all those people off of there, or they had to get a lot more Bitcoin. And you notice there was a push on Bitcoin, but there was not a huge amount of a spike in its price because even though there were a lot of exchanges trying to buy, they'd done it in a reasonable fashion, plus there was not that much available to be purchased. So the price started rising up, and they sort of slacked off on that. And then you saw a lot of brouhaha about, hey, get your Bitcoin and get off our box before the fork. I mean, people sent me emails saying, what's this all about? And it's like they didn't want to be caught in the squeeze of then having to legally give you something they could not obtain because their business model prevented it. Make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. And I got mine
and
off of Coinbase.
You can't blame them, and they're not being evil or anything. They're just trying to stay in business, and they got caught out by this sudden shift that was sort of anti-business model to them.
Yeah, I got my Bitcoin off of Coinbase about 8 days before the fork. I was really dragging my feet, so I got it on a Trezor. And let me just say this and compliment you on the effectiveness and the accuracy of the WebBot reports as it pertains to cryptos. We're still off the mark on silver, and we can talk about that in a minute and why you think that is. But you've been on the mark so much with Bitcoin that I'm hearing, Cliff, that people are running out and getting home equity loans and double mortgages and credit cards to go buy Bitcoin. I think that it's very likely we'll see $6,888 Bitcoin and potentially $13,800, potentially far, far higher. But don't you think it's fair to caution people not to go deeply into debt to buy Bitcoin?
Yeah, I don't like debt at all. I mean, I hate it. That's where they have you buy the short and gnarlies, right? And so I understand it. It's a natural thing. Those people that are leaning that way really need to understand they have to service this debt. And then here's their other problem. They may get trapped out in the sense that there may be something within the Bitcoin not within the Bitcoin community going on such that, exchanges are having problems like they did now recently with the fork, or there may be some kind of FUD coming from regulation or something like this that would cause their investment to go down just at the time they needed to liquidate some of it in order to service the debt on the thing. So I actually can't give any financial advice. I mean, in this state, I could be sued for advising people to do their money in any given way. But I'm philosophically opposed to using debt as an attempt, or to being driven by greed to use debt as an attempt to make a killing in any market in any way. And this is how the touts take you, and that this is how you are harvested. Because people know that this is occurring. They know that there's this speculative mania moving up within the population. And there are many people out there trying to scam you one way or another. And you may even see banks start advertising, need a loan for Bitcoin. And it's like, boy, once that happens, you'd better run from that because we're getting close to another large correction. And the idea of a Bitcoin ETF is really absurd, mathematically absurd. And the reason that it's mathematically absurd is because there's no way for that ETF, if it's an actual holder of Bitcoin, as opposed to yet another Bitcoin Ponzi scheme or pool scheme like the exchanges, there's no way for an ETF to moderate these very large drops that Bitcoin has in its fractal pattern. Now, I'm not a chartist, but I know that the fractal pattern that I discovered a few years ago is active, and it'll be scaled up. So as we scale up to higher and higher heights, we're going to have bigger and bigger crashes. So what's an ETF going to do when there's a 38 to 40+% correction in a matter of, say, an hour or so, a consolidation or drop or whatever you want to say within the nominal dollar price of Bitcoin? The reason that this will occur is because the death throes, the heart attack that the dollar is having is going to be violent. And so they're going to try and save the dollar, and that'll cause, the dollar to momentarily get a little bit of a flush and thus a rise relative to Bitcoin, and then it'll crash again, and then Bitcoin will gain more value and that kind of thing. See, so it's not Bitcoin being particularly volatile in and of itself, because the way the blockchain works, it actually moderates out wild fluctuations in activity, or attempts to. But really what's going on is that, the buttheads that are running the dollar don't know what they're doing. Everything they do aggravates the situation and makes it worse. And we all know that the trend is towards zero for fiat money. And we're getting really close to that.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you this, too, as it pertains to the accuracy of the reports, and just let you know that, again, as it pertains to me holding Ethereum and Bitcoin, those two specifically, I also own Litecoin, Salt, Pillar, a bunch of these others that you've talked about, and some of which appear in your latest report. But sometimes when you're holding these things and they correct, it's sort of those white knuckle moments where you kind of feel sick to your stomach. And my approach is I don't even look at my account. I just look at the long-term report, and I know that, if this thing is going to go to 13,800, whatever this correction was in mid-July, and for instance, Ethereum corrected hard. I think it hit 420, and then it went back down to a low of about 140. I held tightly, because I know that the WebBot report has said Ethereum at some point here, I think you said 538, we can talk about that. So I held on tightly. And the reason I bring it up is because I have a very, very smart friend who people would know, actually, if I mentioned his name. You'd know of this person. He's done very, very well in cryptos. He's an early adopter. And he was convinced that right after the Bitcoin fork would probably be a good time to sell his Bitcoin temporarily. He was convinced that there would be a big pullback, because if Bitcoin couldn't get past that 3,000 high going into the fork, and everybody who wanted it got in before the fork, he was convinced it was going to go lower, and he was wrong on that. And I didn't sell mine because I've got the long-term trend in mind. I'm going to hold for that 13.8 no matter what it does. So again, the accuracy of the report really helps people have confidence in just holding these things. So long-winded question, is that 538 price on Ethereum still valid?
Sure, but bear in mind, you have to ask yourself, why do you care? It is only valid if you're going to try and trade Ethereum and buy it at that level. And I'm not saying that that's the peak of its tooth. So in Ethereum's fractal pattern is very much more violent, as we've seen demonstrated repeatedly, than is Bitcoin. There's also this tuple that goes on there, this occurring 3 times within its fractal pattern. And I expect that Ethereum will continue to demonstrate that pattern, although the base at which these teeth are formed may widen out over time as we get going and it becomes more stable. Nonetheless, though, the correction ratio that we get with Bitcoin is in the 60 and 70%. So the idea is that, Ethereum. And so the idea is that when we get up into the 500s in Ethereum, the next time there's going to be a correction, you might be able to buy back in as low as, maybe the 200, something like that. So it is going to have that pattern. Of course, the issue is, when is the temporality of that going to manifest? And that's really the tricky part of this. We're in an interesting period of time. The reason that I can state now that the reason that the crypto forecasts are so accurate is because I've lived through so many technology cycles, and that's what's going on here. And I would dispute you that your friend is an early adopter of Bitcoin. He's actually an innovator. I would actually dispute anybody that says we're out of the innovator stage, because I don't see any of the early adopter language. Bear in mind, I've been involved in the technology intrusion into populations in large scales. So, for instance, I've been involved in giant networks being set up for major corporations that would have 100,000 or more employees. So that's a cultural center. And you have to, as the person that's in charge of not only setting up all of the equipment, but introducing it in a smooth way into the culture and providing all the training that these people need, then you have to get to the point where you recognize the flow, and you as one of those individuals, I would actually look for the innovators in the early stages of the process and bring them in to be the cadre within that organization that then trained the early adopters. And then we would cross the chasm. The early adopters would get in there, they'd be happy with it. The innovators are always pumped up about it, but the early adopters are happy, and then there's this period where it's just sort of flat, and then it goes mainstream. Okay, we're nowhere near that. We're just about ready in February, by the way I reckon these things linguistically, to take the step from innovator into the larger crowd that is the early adopters. So we're about from 3% or going from 1% to 3% on this. And at that stage, it's once we reach 3%, we'll never go back. It's going to continue going and continue going. Once we reach 10% of the population, then we'll all be involved for the next few decades, converting everything over, just as all of us became involved, even peripherally, as end users in the mass digitization of all the documents of government and folding all of that onto the internet. So, I mean, we all participated in it at some level. I was actually part of projects where we, ran millions of documents through scanners and OCR and all of these scripts to extract all the information and that kind of thing. But everybody at some level was that's alive now was in the process of that. And so we're in that now. We're in the process of our entire human society eating the concept of money by software. Software is becoming money. Our digital infrastructure is broadening out into not only things on the internet, but the abstractions that humans use to pass energy and relationships between each other. And one of those major ones is currency. So we've all known, at least a lot of us that have thought about this and have discussed it, that software at some time was going to come and eat the world of money. And a lot of people said, digitized stock market and so on. And I said, no, there had to be something else. It had to be broader than that. That's why I was looking for something like Bitcoin without knowing what it was way back in 2005. And so when the white paper came out, it was, the lightning moment. And there you go. Here it is. Software is going to eat money. And man, it's progressing very fast. We're about to cross into that, as I say, from the 1% threshold into that group that will ultimately yield us into the 3%. Those are our early adopters. I'm seeing the very beginning of that language being forecast for February. Should become visible to anybody that's paying attention by about May. And so I have no idea at this stage, because I don't have any numbers being offered, as to what Bitcoin and Ethereum might be at May of next year. But we won't be talking the kinds of digits that we are now.
Okay, and just two more questions in order to be respectful of your time here. And the first question here is one that, it's the type of question you got to ask because you don't want to ask it. I don't want to open up this whole Lynette Zhang AC chain can of worms thing again, because you were actually kind enough, you're such a gentleman, you're like, emailed me last night saying, just a heads up, I don't agree with Lynette Zhang's position on this, but if you want to talk about it, we can. I feel like she's kind of been put through the ringer enough, and I did have a really nice conversation last night with Joe and Brad Peters, but let me ask you just in terms of the big picture. Knowing that I think JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or both have now patented some blockchain technologies or something that they're working on, knowing that the banks have done nothing but evil to humanity for a very long time, do you think it isn't within the realm of possibility that the Bank for International Settlements and or the IMF could be trying to implement or hatch a plan to
no blockchain
to ensnare humanity?
Shit, guys, sorry. You have to understand the mindset of the people you're dealing with up there. These are not technical thinkers. They don't look for technical solutions. Technology scares them because it distributes power. The last thing they would do is involve any form of technology and any access to any coin that they wanted to use to dominate. They're not going to allow you to get at it. Their mindset is entirely different. Plus the stuff that Lynette's been given, she does not understand, and I think she's being played. I say that because I saw briefly some of the video with no sound, and I saw some images coming up that she had presented, and I could not find them in the original Chinese video. So I think someone dubbed in some things to make her think that it's a little bit more sinister than it is. However, that aside, if my old eyes simply missed those two elements I was looking for, still, the super nodes, the description, all of this is just a pie in the sky by a Chinese company that wants to try and out-dominate the banks. And they have no connection whatsoever to officialdom in any way that I can find. I was very upset personally with only the characterization, okay? That she didn't understand the information is neither here nor there. What I found to be somewhat dodgy in terms of the vibration it's putting out into the community is the characterization of this company in China as being mysterious. No, there's no mystery there. You can find anything you want about them. They're not trying to hide anything. And the code segment that you presented that your friend from Intel popped up, that was filling an array with some values. I can write a coin and tie it to the SDR and it's meaningless, just as their coin is meaningless. And you'll note that there's nothing in their code that says go out and find the relative value of the SDR based on the formulas given by the IMF on these currencies. All it does with that little code snippet is fill an array for a display so that you would know what an SDR is based on. This ratio of, or these fiat currencies, and it doesn't even give you the appropriate ratio, and those are all multipliers anyway, and the SDR is not a traded commodity in that sense. So yes, I agree with you, the guys at the top are a bunch of evil bastards and we got to watch out for them, and they're sneaky and they're trying all kinds of stuff, but their approach is infiltration, not competition. And no, they don't, if you can't beat them, join them. They don't buy into that kind of a philosophy. These people have a much more twisted mentality. So under the circumstances, it's FUD. It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's being spread. The Chinese coin, AC coin, is just like if I decided I was going to take on the banks, I might try and do a digitize everything coin as well. And I would put it on those kind of structures. The idea of the supernode is really anti blockchain, and it tells you right off the bat that these people are basically scamming because they're going to run a centralized system, and they're claiming a connection to the SDR that they're not authorized to make, but the IMF and these people could not stop them if they tried. Anybody can make a claim that their coin is going to be hooked to the SDR somehow. So it's a little goofy. Fiat is dying. The elite are trying to get control of things, but more than that, they've got issues because the elite themselves are fleeing into crypto with their own wealth, and they're not trying to create their own crypto. And except in a couple of instances, I know of bankers that said, "Oh, well, let's go, do this scheme and harvest a bunch of money here." And I wrote about some of those in the Scheist Coin section of one of the reports. But beyond that, no, Lynette Zhang is a metals dealer. She has an alarmist tone in terms of how she presents this material. Yes, the New World Order is a bunch of mean bastards that we've got to be careful of. But no, they're not going to eat everything with their software coin and tie up your property and all of this sort of deal. So her presentation is... she's not the person to be judging cryptos, and the material that was presented to her, I believe, was done. That was it. It was presented to her. I don't think she ferreted it out. I don't think, because obviously she didn't do even a cursory examination on the AC Coin company itself. There's no mystery there at all.
Okay. Well, the one thing I would say, just to push back a little bit as far as the elite go and using technology to ensnare and enslave, is this whole 5G Internet of Everything thing where they want to chip, literally billions of chips. They want to chip everything, every product, every living creature, and they want to track and trace everything. So that was one of the things.
Well, that's not okay, but hang on a second. Let's examine this from a very realistic technical perspective. That's not out of line, all right? Having a chip attached to your cows, especially in Europe, where mad cow disease is there, guarantees you, at least up to the point of slaughter, what's going on. Plus, these chips can be used as sensor apparatus. I was involved in this project where they stuck little coated wires in the snouts of all these salmon fry and steelhead and let them loose into the wild. And for dozens and dozens and dozens of years, the state of Washington ran what was known as the head lab, where they took all these fish heads, extracted the little coated wires, read the digital material on them, and took the DNA samples out of those fish heads that they had, did the electrophoresis on them, and came up with DNA patterns. And that was not part of any New World Order. That was kind of a method for Canada, the tribes, and the state of Washington, and Oregon, and some other states to fight over the fish. And so there are natural needs for us to understand what is going on at a complex level as a complex humanity, as a complex human society. With or without the New World Order, we're going to need to do stuff like this just to be able to effectively manage our resources. And here's the thing. Say that there's a giant natural disaster. Wouldn't it be handy to have a computer somewhere that said, well, look, in the region that was just affected, we have X, Y, Z in the way of resources that have been wasted. But hey, over in this other region, we can look on the computer now and find out that we've got this percentage of excess, that percentage of excess, and this other percentage of excess that can be shipped into the devastated region. And we can do this because we can identify everything because of the chips. So I'm quite in favor of the Internet of Everything, right? there are evil ways it can be used. But I'm actually a I'll give you a family secret here, okay? And it'll perhaps explain my viewpoint. My people are pirates, okay? Actually, pirates of the Caribbean. My mother's family traces its roots back through the Azores, back through the Caribbean, back through the Azores to the expulsion of the Templars in France, their hiding out in Portugal, their flight to the Azores, and then being kicked out of the Azores and taking up residency in the Caribbean as pirates. So I got pirates in my background, as well as horse thieves. And so I count on the fact that there's this DNA out there that affects people like myself that says, I'm going to game your damn system. So let the New World Order move in mass into the technological world, because you got a lot of raspy old farts out there and young guys like that are all like myself that have the attitude is, all it takes is a decent PC or a smartphone and some smarts, and I've got you. I mean, if you've ever messed around with the deep web, you could probably get millions of people out of there to decide that, under these circumstances, I think I'll join the collective fight. And some of these people are extremely talented. So I'm not that worried about them moving into technology. If the idea of putting a chip in me, no, that's not going to happen. Okay. And if they were to put a chip into me, well, they're very easily defeated with a small, short burst of microwave radiation that's targeted. And you can even find how to make these devices online.
Okay, that was what I was going to ask you as a Christian. I wanted to know where you stood on chipping people, because I believe that's also
okay.
What they
I'm not a Christian.
I didn't ask. No, I am a Christian. So.
Oh, okay.
That's
okay.
what. Sorry. So I wanted to get your thought on, do you draw the line at chipping people? Because they'd like, and correct, you just made it clear.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's just finish out the call then and talk about something that you and Lynette Zhang do agree on, and that's $600 silver. Why do you suppose the WebBot reports, the WebBot data has not been accurate as it pertains to the price moves of silver and gold?
Well, because it's manipulated at a level that I had not anticipated. But here's another issue. Okay. I was talking with some kids and a couple of scientists about this. The accuracy rate of the data sets it has to be looked at in two different ways. Sometimes the accuracy rate is really phenomenal and the timing is really phenomenal. One of the example is blondes on boats. The amount of language that actually manifested as the Costa Concordia crashed, and I said all this language would occur 5 months ahead of the ship actually running aground, and it was a spectacular hit. And there's been maybe 24 of them over the past few decades where it was really huge amount of connection on the language, and it was precise on the timing. Now, there have been a lot where the language shows up, but the timing is just really wonky on it, and we might be a year off, and all of a sudden everything plays out just like it was described. And I think that's what's going on with silver. And I think what's going on with that is that there's been a huge amount of emotional, suppressed emotional reaction to silver. And that's what's building up. That's what gives us the language. Around the $600 silver mark may be, and this is my personal fear, may be something so catastrophic for the fiat-based economic system that's why the $600 information came all the way back to 2002. So in other words, there's going to be such a huge emotional outcry as fiat collapses and silver is suddenly $600 an ounce on its way to, infinity. There will be such a huge emotional reaction that emotional reaction that we're about to encounter and produce actually went back through time to influence our data in 2002. Make sense?
Sorry, had you muted.
Okay, so under those circumstances, that's really a scary time for me, because that amount of an emotional wave that it can travel back, say it happens in 2018. Okay, we're looking at a 16-year time frame then from the event occurring, and then the previous description of that event showing up for the first time in our data. And it has held solid since then, that at some point all these linguistics are going to clump around $600 an ounce silver. And like I say, that stuff is very scary because of all of the other linguistics. Now, we're in that period of time now. There's no reason to be scared of it now because it's going to happen. We're going to just have to live through it. And we're also coincidentally picking up a lot of the ancillary sets of that $600 an ounce silver, which is the degradation of the infrastructure here in the United States, the political degradation, the threat of nuclear war, the strange energies from space, and all of this stuff that was all tied into that way back in 2002. And so that's really the issue there. It's a misinterpretation on my part insofar as the propagation of the emotional wave outward. My propagation studies when I did this all through the 90s had to be based on a growing internet, not anything stable, but a continually growing internet. And I'm convinced that the propagation studies, should I run them again now, and they took years, would yield a different set of metrics that I could use to fine-tune my predictions in a general sense, my forecasts. And the propagation studies that I did 18 months ago that allowed me to really dial in on the cryptos have further convinced me that that is indeed the case. I was able to run a quick set of propagation studies over a course of about 6 months based entirely on crypto language because the niche was so narrow. I could easily get the stuff in. It was just a shot in the dark if this would work, and indeed it did. And so there we are. We've got a formula for approaching this that now has proven itself accurate for, like I say, at least close to the last 2 years on the cryptos, and extremely accurate in many cases. So that's really what's going on is relative to the forecast and so on. So getting back to the gut level, that that kind of thing. If you're experiencing those kind of emotions relative to buying into cryptos, probably you shouldn't. This is one of the things for me is you buy it, you forget about it. It's a long-term hold. I'm not into the trading mentality. And so that's really where the focus of our report is. Now, some of the people are pulling language out of the reports to do trading, and more power to them, because I know that I'm going to get, say, a 5% gain or a 15% or 30% or whatever it is, whatever my gain is on Bitcoin between now and the 13,000 mark, right? Okay, well, I know that there are people that if they trade it accurately could double or triple or quadruple the amount of overall gain that might be in that coin. But I don't have the stomach to do that, nor do I have the smarts. So, that's kind of where I'm at.
I'm with you on that as it pertains to that 6,888 mark, right? I mean, you're saying there could be a big pullback from there. So, if you had the wherewithal to do it, and you wanted to really gut check yourself, you could get out around 6,800, 6,900 and wait to buy back in. You'd end up getting, more Bitcoin. My problem is that historically I've been a terrible trader with stocks.
So I'm worse than you.
I don't want to screw myself out of my crypto, so I tend to just hold it. I white knuckle it, Cliff.
Yeah, well, I don't bother with the white knuckle because the value of the crypto, the nominal dollar amount, is meaningless to me because I'm now shifting my mind over to the purchasing power of the crypto. Who cares what the purchasing power of the dollar is? It's kind of like when I was a kid, right? We went to Germany, we got US dollars, we'd get Finning from, Finning and marks from the German. Or you're going down to Italy and you get lira. Well, when you're in Germany, you don't give a rat's ass as to how many lira you get for your dollar, and vice versa. And so that's kind of what it is, right? Unless you're actively going to sell at that point, that's really the only time to concentrate on prices. And like I say, I didn't even know what they were. I don't check them daily. I could care less about the market cap. I've got other stuff to do. And the crypto world is going to go on because it's a technology adoption phase. Only it's for all of humanity on a primary emotional kind of thing, and it's going to take decades and decades and decades. So this is like way early days, and the fact that you're discussing this now is one of these like generational myth things, right? When you talk to your grandkids or great grandkids, you can say, well, back in the day, I was there when Bitcoin was born. And, and here Bitcoin is at that time might be, $1 million each, something like that. But you won't care because it'll be actually purchasing power, and you may not even measure it in the dollar because who will care?